Here is your complete start sit guide to every wide receiver, every running back, and every single matchup all in one video. If you do appreciate that and all the information being in one place, please hit that like button and subscribe as we get into it. Starting with the running back tier list in the S tier here, we're going to have Kyren, Saquon, and Derrick Henry. Not much explanation here. Kyren has been averaging 22 rush attempts a game, 95 yards, and 1.3 touchdowns a game in his last 3 weeks. He's absolutely putting them on his back, 6 yards per carry through that stretch as well. We also have Kupp coming back, and if that does happen, it'll only open up this offense even more, generating more scoring, more time on field, and hopefully a more run-heavy script for Kyren. And then we have Saquon Barkley in his revenge game against his former team with the Giants, who were allowing 4.87 yards per carry. There's no world where Saquon doesn't get more than 20 carries. The Eagles should be up in this game, leading to a more run-heavy script. The Giants' defense isn't amazing on their own. Derrick Henry has had a touchdown in 6 straight games. He's had at least 90 yards in his past 5. He gets a matchup here against the Buccaneers, who will allow 12 fantasy points to the position just on the ground alone, without receptions and all the yards from that. And they also allow 4.6 yards per carry. None of that matters when you have a guy like Derrick Henry. We're dropping it down to the A tier. We have Bijan Robinson finally. His breakout game back on track last week, as to be expected, but now he gets a little bit tougher of a matchup here against the Falcons compared to the Panthers last week, who allow 5.3 yards per carry, 16 fantasy points on the year to the running back position. The Falcons are top 5 in the NFL in first half points scored, so there is a chance they get up early in this matchup. They run out the ball, which is what we want to see for Bijan Robinson in a matchup against the Seahawks. But Kenneth Walker, also a PPR monster. This guy, ever since coming back from his injury, has had 19 receptions in his last 3 games. Whichever way this game goes, if they're going to be down, if they're going to be up, he's going to get receiving upside, he's going to get a ton of usage on the ground. It does not matter. Kenneth Walker is going to be a start regardless. And next we have Breece Hall, 18 attempts last week, 113 yards against the Bills. We saw exactly what we expected with a new coaching change. The offense is coming back to what they do good in running the ball with a great talent like Breece Hall, who's getting a significant percentage more of the rushing attempts than Braylon Allen. Even in a tougher matchup this week against the Steelers, Davante Adams is only going to help this team get their offense more fluid, stay on the field. Also a good thing for him. Following that with Joe Mixon and Brian Robinson, Mixon has looked good. Coming back from injury, he only saw 42% of the snaps, but had a ton of usage and did not look like he was injured whatsoever. He is questionable coming into this week as well at the time of this recording, so we will be moving him up or down depending on that injury status. But Brian Robinson is also questionable coming into this matchup. If he does play, he is a must start instantly. He gets this matchup against the Panthers, who let everybody run against them. They are one of, if not the best matchup for running backs. They allow the second most points to the position. The Commanders' offense has been playing good. If they continue to do that against a lackluster defense against the Panthers, this should be a very run-heavy script for Brian Robinson in this offense. If he gets anything less than 15 fantasy points, I'd be very surprised. Then we'll follow that with Chuba, J.K. Dobbins, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Tony Pollard here. A ton of green flags for these guys. Jonathan Brooks is not going to play this week, which means we have another week of Chuba being the RB1. He has been absolutely amazing. He has had 92 or more rush yards on 5.9 yards per carry in every single one of his last 4 games. He runs a ton of routes out of the backfield as well. He is a top running back through these weeks in routes run. On the other side, he's getting a matchup against the Commanders, who don't have a good defense still. The pass defense is a lot worse than the run defense, but they're still top 10 in points allowed to the position. And then we have J.K. Dobbins, who has seen a ton of volume every week. Obviously, we have Gus Edwards on IR, putting Kamani Vidal into this offense. He looks decent, but he's not going to see anywhere near a good amount of snaps to take anything away from J.K. Dobbins this week. So he's still going to be a start in this matchup against the Cardinals, who have allowed over 100 rush yards a game in their last 4 games. And then we have Jahmyr Gibbs also seeing a ton of success in everything but fantasy numbers. The efficiency looks really good. The yardage looks pretty good. He just hasn't scored a touchdown as much as you'd like because Dave Montgomery's taken them all. He's had 6 touchdowns in 5 games. I will get to him later, but the offensive line is great. Even in a tough matchup against the Vikings, who are allowing the second least points to running backs, he gets a ton of work in the receiving game. I'm not too worried about it, but I will want to move Pollard up these rankings. There is some red flags here, though, with Will Levis. It obviously is going to hurt his upside. He is just really the worst quarterback in the NFL. He's the QB 45 in passer rating. Yes, that's behind backup quarterbacks. He's also the QB 30 in completions per game, the QB 34 in passing yards per game, behind backup still. So it's going to hurt him. But the good news is he gets a dream matchup against the Bills, who are very positive to running backs this year. Pollard has seen 16 or more carries in 4 out of his last 5 games, and it looks like Tyjae Spears is not going to play. He is just really in for a huge game with receiving upside and also the opportunities on the ground. And then we'll take David Montgomery, Chase Brown, Devon Achane, Josh Jacobs, and Jordan Mason all here together, rapid firing these lists. Like Gibbs, the matchup is great for David Montgomery. He's had 19 touchdowns in his last 19 games. This guy's an absolute touchdown monster. It is a tough matchup against the Vikings. But then Chase Brown really has officially outworked Zach Moss for the RB1 in this backfield. Even coming off injury last week, we saw that now he gets a tougher matchup against the Browns, but with no Amari Cooper, so it should relatively stay close, and a run-heavy script is fine for what we're expecting. And Achane is ruled in for this matchup here. It's positive against the Colts, who are allowing the 11th most points to running backs this season. If Tony Pollard can put up 16 fantasy points against this defense with Will Levis, Devon Achane can do pretty decent with Tyler Huntley at quarterback. Josh Jacobs, again, he gets a ton of usage. The touchdowns just are not there. The red zone ceiling is a little bit lower than you'd hope for his RB1 as good as Josh Jacobs, but they get a matchup against the Texans squad who, in recent memory, teams try to establish the run on the Texans. So it should be a positive game script for him to get a lot of usage, and it should be high scoring as well because both of these teams like to pass, like to play fast. And Jordan Mason may or may not play at the time of this recording. It looks like he might. He does get a really tough matchup here against the Chiefs, who are allowing some of the least points to opposing running backs, though. I don't worry about it. The 49ers offense is good enough. They have enough weapons to diversify this offense. If Isaac Guerendo is a starting running back, I would definitely move him down from where I have Mason right now, but still a viable flex guy if you do need it. Moving down a tier, though, we have Aaron Jones, James Cook, James Conner, Tank Bigsby, Kareem Hunt, Najee, and Gibson / Ramondre, which I will get into in a second. Aaron Jones, he gets a matchup against the Lions, allowing the second least points to opposing running backs. So it is a really tough matchup. On the other side, they're allowing a ton of points to wide receivers, which I will get into for the wide receivers half of this video, but they're allowing less than 4 yards per carry to the running back position. He will need receiving work to be good in fantasy this week, which I think is possible for him to get, but Aiden Hutchinson being out could definitely be beneficial for him to have a better fantasy day and give the offense more time. James Cook looks to be fully healthy after missing last week. They're going to need him in this matchup against the Titans, who are allowing the 4th least points to opposing running backs. There is a real chance that Ray Davis does get some run because he looked so good last week, and turf toe is a thing that tends to come back here and there. But James Cook has been very efficient on his rushing attempts and really the only source of offense here. Now that we have Amari Cooper, it should be that much easier for them to get in the red zone, obviously giving James Cook more touchdown upside. James Conner last week, the numbers looked really bad. He didn't see one single touch in the 4th quarter, though, because of how out of hand this game got. His matchup against the Chargers is a little bit tough, but the game should be closer to where James Conner is going to be perfectly fine here. And Tank Bigsby gets an interesting matchup here against the Patriots, who, I mean, they're pretty positive. ETN is questionable coming into this week. There is a high percentage chance that he does not play, which would move Tank Bigsby up these rankings. Patriots are allowing 17.6 points to opposing running backs this year, and the Jaguars absolutely feed the running backs in their offense when they have a lead, but that doesn't happen very often because it is the Jaguars against the Patriots. You should be able to expect that to happen. Next, we have Kareem Hunt and Najee. Hunt seems to be the clear RB1 for the Chiefs. He had 27 rushing attempts against the Saints in week 5. He's projected for 14 rushing attempts here, 3 receptions against the 49ers, which isn't as tough of a matchup in fantasy points allowed as you would expect. Najee had a great game last week, kind of his first breakout game, over 100 yards on the ground and only 46% of the snaps regardless. That was against the Raiders defense. Now he gets a really tough one against the Jets. It is negative, but we do have Russell Wilson starting. We'll see if that's a positive. It's definitely going to bring some more risk as far as knowing what to expect, but there should be more red zone and touchdown upside without Justin Fields taking them all. The team is second in rushing attempts as well. But Ramondre and Gibson are both tied here. It does depend on if Ramondre is actually going to play this week, but Drake May does bring some light to this offense where you can have a little bit of hope for what they can actually do and move the ball a little bit with some touchdown upside. Then we'll take it down to Austin Eckler, Nick Chubb, Bucky Irving, and Rachaad White, 2 guys that I'm sure a lot of people have questions about, which I will get into very quickly. Eckler's status will change if Brian Robinson doesn't play. I'm assuming that he will, but even in that sense, Eckler has had 10 or more fantasy points every single week thanks to his duality in the rushing and receiving game. The Panthers just are not a good defense, so you're going to be starting him regardless of that. In the past 3 weeks, they've let Roschon Johnson, Chase Brown, Zach Moss, Bijan Robinson, and Tyler Algier all go for over 14.5 fantasy points or more, and that's just not a good number. But can you believe that Nick Chubb is actually going to make his return this week? It's still questionable. It's up in the air. It looks like he might, and if he does, he gets a matchup here against the Bengals, who are top 10 in points allowed to the running back position. He might not be a guaranteed to play, and if he does, he will be limited, but he's definitely the best running back that the Browns have at this point. If he is out, I'm kind of hesitant in starting Jerome Ford because you have no idea who's going to get touches in this backfield when the number 1 RB of Nick Chubb isn't in there. So putting Bucky Irving and Rachaad White next up in this tier, they're going to be back-to-back. Todd Bowles has come out and told us that this is going to be a 3 running back by committee. We're going to ride the hot hand. Everybody's going to get touches. I do expect Bucky and Rachaad White to be the number 1 and 2 as far as that goes. If the game gets out of hand or the game script completely changes, maybe Sean Tucker will come in as a change of pace back. We're not going to be starting him. I am even still worried about starting Bucky and Rachaad. He is questionable coming into this matchup, so there is a chance White doesn't play, and that would move Bucky up these rankings. I don't think we need to be taking that risk of starting Sean Tucker just yet. even though he did put up over 30 fantasy points last week. But finishing out this running back tier list, we're going to have Zach Moss, Alexander Mattison, Trace Sermon with no JT playing, Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary combined. Tracy, Dable has already said that he's earned himself more touches. That's a little bit too early to say he's the RB1 yet, even though I do believe he will be at some point, followed by Tyler Algier and Raheem Mostert. But moving into the wide receiver section of this video, we're going to have the exact same tier list, but with the wide receivers. Our S tier going to go by very quickly because we're starting all these guys regardless. We're taking Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamar Chase, AJ Brown, and Malik Neighbors. Taking that into the next tier though, we're going to have Chris Godwin, Drake London, Diggs, Flowers, and Jaden Reed. Godwin coming off a huge game last week, and now we get Mike Evans probably coming back into this offense this week. He is questionable. Either way, if he does, Godwin's not going to be moving down because he gets a matchup against the Ravens, who are allowing the second most points to opposing wide receivers. Godwin also does play in the slot, and Baker is extremely favoring his slot wide receivers this year, which is why Chris Godwin's a top 5 guy. But Drake London has had double-digit targets in his last 3 games, the number 2 wide receiver in red zone targets on the entire year. When you have an offense that is passing a bunch and Kirk Cousins, who's serviceable enough to get you some targets, you're going to be good. And your fantasy point per reception number is going to be high with those touchdowns, which is what we love to see in a matchup against the Seahawks, who could very well make this game a pass-heavy shootout script. I mean, they're number 1 in passing attempts so far this year. Stephon Diggs coming into his second game without Nico Collins here. Actually, against the Patriots, they brought him out of the slot a lot more than I expected, so the duality of that being in the slot and the outside is going to help Stephon Diggs get those deep downfield targets, which is going to garner a higher fantasy point per reception number. We'd love to see that. The touchdown upside is obviously there, him playing in the slot in a matchup against the Packers where it should be only offense and everything but offense and a ton of passing volume, followed by Zay Flowers against the Buccaneers here, who are top 5 in points allowed to the wide receiver position and allow a lot of attempts. You just have to hope that the game script for the Ravens actually sticks to the pass, because if for whatever reason they get out in front and they destroy the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, there's going to be no hope for Zay Flowers, and that's kind of what we're getting ourselves into. I do expect them to pass a bunch. This is a very positive matchup for wide receivers, not so much running backs. And then we have Jaden Reed ruled in against the Texans here, who are very vulnerable to wide receivers in the slot as well. He is a slot wide receiver. Even if he doesn't play a full amount of snaps, he still needs to be started. I don't expect that to happen though. And moving down to the B tier, we're going to have Cooper Kupp finally back in here with Deontay Johnson, Evans, DK, and Terry. We are somewhat taking the risk of Kupp coming back and him not playing a full snap share. He did see 21 targets in his first week. He's still questionable, but with no Puka, this offense has to go somewhere. We know Matthew Stafford loves targeting Cooper Kupp as well. Deontay Johnson had a great game last week. Now he's getting a dream matchup against the Commanders, who are allowing some of the most points to wide receivers. He's the number 1 guy here clearly, and the Commanders offense is rolling. So you're going to expect the Panthers to keep passing to stay in this game. And looking at Evans, again, he should be good to go with no limitations. If that does happen, he gets a matchup where the Bucs should focus the pass, just like Chris Godwin. And DK Metcalf coming off a bad game. He got a touchdown called back. He had 11 targets. The numbers were there, just the fantasy points weren't. But now he gets a matchup against the Falcons, which isn't necessarily easy, but it isn't hard either. It's definitely possible to have success. He has in the past. Then we have Terry McLaurin, who in the last 3 weeks has been a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy football, getting a matchup against the Panthers, who can't stop the run or the pass. Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams are going to be next up, tied here with Tank Dell, Debo, and Devontae Smith. A lot of people are scared for the Adams addition in this offense for Garrett Wilson, but at the very least, now we have every team's number 1 defensive assignment going to Davante Adams instead of Garrett Wilson. They're both going to take turns running in and out of the slot, which is important when you have Aaron Rodgers, who is number 2 in time to throw this year. This guy gets the ball out quick. The guy that's number 1 is Baker Mayfield, and you know who his slot receiver is? Chris Godwin, who's a top 5 guy. So you can expect Aaron Rodgers and both of these receivers to be a little bit more high upside. Then we have Tank Dell, who's been great when he's been given the opportunity. He's had 6 games in his career with 8 or more targets. He's put up 15 fantasy points in each of those games. Now that we have no Nico Collins, that 8 target mark is almost a guarantee in a matchup against the Packers. He is a must start as well. Always touchdown upside with him. But then we have Deebo Samuel, who on the other side gets a really tough matchup against the Chiefs. They are not allowing a ton of points to the wide receiver position, but you got to expect if the 49ers want to beat the Chiefs, they're going to have to pass a lot to stay in this game, and they're probably coming for blood from all the Super Bowl losses that they had to the Chiefs as well. Deebo Samuel is a primary part of this offense, whether his game log shows that from the past few weeks or not. We still have to be starting him, and without Christian McCaffrey, he does get an average of at least 3 or 4 rushing attempts a game, which is going to bring his upside up. And with Dallas Goedert out because of a hamstring injury, Devontae Smith upside has been increased a ton. Every single game that he's played since he was drafted with Dallas Goedert, not in this offense, he's had at least 15 fantasy points in those 8 games. So there's going to be upside for him, even more targets to go his way, and he plays primarily in the slot. The great thing is the Giants do not play good against slot wide receivers this year. So we have AJ Brown taking the number 1 coverage assignment it's going to be good for Smith this week. And then we're going to be taking it down to T. Higgins, Tyreek, Brandon Ayuk, Brian Thomas Jr., Darnell Mooney, and Jordan Addison. Higgins benefits from Jamar Chase pulling the number 1 coverage, which is Denzel Ward. The rest of the offense is going to be moving a little bit. So we have Tyreek next, forced to play another week with Tyler Huntley. The good news is they're coming off a bye, one more week to kind of solidify that offense and make sure they're on the same beat against the Colts, who are allowing the 7th most points to opposing wide receivers and have allowed 4 wide receivers to go over 110 yards on them this year. Ayuk also will be a main part of this offense here for the 49ers. Due to the Chiefs' insane run-stopping defense, you're going to expect the target volume to go up a little bit more for Ayuk. George Kittle will benefit the most from this matchup. The Chiefs are easiest against the tight ends. Everybody should get their numbers, though. I do expect George Kittle to have the most upside in this matchup. Then we have Brian Thomas Jr., who gets one against Christian Gonzalez and the Patriots, which it is tough, but it's definitely not impossible. We just saw Diggs and Tank Dell go both for over 18 fantasy points and a touchdown each, followed by Brian Thomas Jr., who has been averaging 8 targets a game over his last 4. And if you have May in this offense for the Patriots, you can expect them to score and probably move the offense a little bit more. Jaguars should stay pass heavy here, which will be good for Brian Thomas Jr. With Darnell Mooney, the Falcons aren't going to run the ball as much as they did last week against the Panthers. They're just really bad. That's what teams do against the Panthers. A better matchup with more passing volume is expected here against the Seattle Seahawks. Jordan Addison next will have a bunch of success against the Lions, who are top 5 in points allowed to wide receivers this year. Darnold has had 11 touchdowns in his last 5 games. So with a questionable Aaron Jones against a really tough Lions run defense, you can't expect Jordan Addison to be eating when you have Justin Jefferson taking the number 1 coverage again. And in the next tier, we're going to have JSN, Juju, Demario Douglas, and Wan'Dale Robinson. JSN, I do want to start him this week. He is a great slot wide receiver, but he's getting a matchup here against D. Alford and the Falcons. This guy alone is allowing the number one most receptions and receiving yards out of the slot 2 wide receivers this year. He's in for a good game. With Juju, we have multiple reports coming out saying that he's going to be a top target in KC, which is good to see when you look at last week. And if we take a little flashback to the 2022 season where he was a starter, he averaged 16 fantasy points in every single game where he saw more than 5 targets. It's pretty much a guarantee that he's going to see at least 5 targets in this matchup. Followed by Demario Douglas with the Patriots. He was number 1 on the team in Drake May's first game in first read targets. He's the slot guy. He's going to keep everything close, tight, and fast. His offense quite literally cannot get any worse than they were with Jacoby Brissett. He led this offense to 11.2 points a game. With Drake May in his first, he saw 21, and the offense was a lot more efficient. But even if you forget about all of that, he gets a matchup against the Jaguars, who are allowing the number 1 most points to opposing slot wide receivers. It's a great matchup if Drake May can show up and play football, followed by Wan'Dale Robinson. We have Malik Neighbors back into this offense. That's only going to open up the offense even more and allow Daniel Jones to move the ball and actually keep some first downs coming. So Wan'Dale Robinson also has quietly been the wide receiver 23, averaging over 10 targets a game. I have no worries for him. That's going to be followed off with Jacoby Myers, Jameson Williams, George Pickens, Romeo Doubs, Adam McConkey, and Josh Downs. For everybody that made it to the end of this video, I really do appreciate you. I'm sorry for the lack of statistical numbers and the fact that it was all combined into one video. I got food poisoning the other day, and I have been absolutely going through it for the past few days. I still wanted to get this video out for you. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. You guys are real ones. Thank you guys for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.